Okay.
Perfect. Thank you. Good morning, Coldwell Banker George Realty. Welcome. I hope everybody's having a fabulous morning to their Wednesday. Today we have a very special guest, Brian Smith. He's an attorney. He's going to be going over the risk management on the residential purchase agreement. So without further ado, Brian, the floor is yours.
Okay, so good morning, everybody.
Good morning, Brian.
Thank you for being here. I see we've got, thanks so much, and a few people on Zoom. And I was just talking with some of you before we started. Yeah, I was here in January, so hopefully some of you remember me from then. And I'm a real estate attorney. I defend real estate brokers. I really rarely sue people. Majority of my cases, I'm defending people, trying to get people out of trouble and really looking for solutions to problems here, looking to see, where this transaction went wrong. How can we put it back together so that there's a business-like, efficient resolution of this transaction? Your broker carries errors and omissions insurance. So my firm is appointed by the insurance carrier to defend you when some issue arises in a transaction. And of course, I work with Peter also in your office when issues come up in transactions, when there's a claim. When I was here in February, talked with you all about things like investigations of properties, fiduciary duties to your clients. And so for today, gonna do an overview and a walkthrough of the residential purchase agreement, which it's newish. It's been out about 2 years now, but it has differences from the earlier residential purchase agreement. And of course, it's the CAR residential purchase agreement. I have an outline here, which I encourage you to take. I've also brought copies of the CAR residential purchase agreement here that you can take and you can look through, because we'll look at some specific paragraphs. Of course, I've redacted out, I've whited out where it has the names of the buyer and the seller and the agents in this case. So it's just like a template where we can look at the contract here and the residential purchase agreement. So first of all, of course, if you're selling vacant land, there's a different contract to use. I say different, but it's similar. But at the top of it, it will say vacant land purchase agreement. It's drafted by CAR, so the skeleton of it will be the same. It will be similar, but just remember, this contract is for your single family residence. Probably most of what you folks are working on, but if you're selling an empty lot, remember there's a different form. Remember, you're selling a commercial property, it is a different contract. There's, AIR forms, and so just be cognizant of that. Really, real simple issue, but big picture of what type of property you're dealing with. And if anyone on Zoom, if you can't hear me, can't see something, please let me know. And then going into this residential purchase agreement, like I'm looking at page 1, paragraph 2, agency. So remember your agency disclosure. Before this form even comes into play, you have to have made your agency disclosure to your buyer that has a separate form. So if somehow you haven't done that by the time this form comes up, do it immediately. And that's why it says to be confirmation, meaning it's already happened by the time you've gotten to this form. And, and here's a real important and interesting issue with the purchase agreement and with most of the forms you're using in your transactions. I have it in my outline. How do you transmit it to your client? Well, when you first start working with your client, I suggest you ask them, have you used electronic signature programs before? Have you used DocuSign? And, get an idea with them of how comfortable they are with signing things electronically. So You could just send it to them electronically to sign, but maybe you have a buyer who you need to print it out and meet with him or her in person. Another interesting thing you can do is you can just email the form, this purchase agreement. You could even do it with the transfer disclosure statement. You could do it with a counter offer. You can email it to your client just as a PDF document before they get it in the DocuSign program. Some people feel a little bit overwhelmed with the DocuSign program, like it takes you right to this line and you've got to sign there. So, don't forget, you can just send it to them in an email and then say, if this looks good, then I'll send it to you in DocuSign. And that really protects you, because if a problem arises, your client's going to find an attorney, and that attorney is going to say, oh, this agent at Coldwell Banker George, he just sent my client this stack of documents and this program he didn't understand. And the real estate agent just told them, click here. And
Is it, you're
Yeah.
having a hard time looking at me. Is it a good practice to send them an email, like when you're sending a document saying, hey, please review and make sure you understand everything before signing it? Would that help you?
absolutely. Yes, absolutely. So you can send it to them in DocuSign, and DocuSign will have that little message that says, please review and sign. But I think the safer method to protect yourself more would be, just put it in a PDF, attach it to an email and say, hi, take a look at this. If this looks okay, I'll put it in the format for you to sign.
Perfect.
And, when I was here in January, I was telling you about this trial I had coming up, where I was in February and March in this trial for about a month. And the buyer sued her own agent, and what the buyer's attorney said, what they concocted for the courts, was that the agent sent the buyer a stack of disclosures, your transfer disclosure statement, seller property questionnaire, and they actually were sent on the day she was due to remove contingencies, and said, here's these documents, please sign them in DocuSign. And then the buyer testified, well, when I got them, I called my agent and I said, I don't understand this. And he told me, well, just sign it, we'll talk about it later. So she went ahead and signed it. But what my client, the real estate agent, testified to was, no, when I sent it to her in DocuSign a week before, I had printed it out, come over to her house, left it on her kitchen table, and we had discussed it then. That was really, we had to see who the jury believed. Actually, in that case, it was the judge deciding. But so that was the buyer's argument in court, was my agent gave it to me in the electronic form, told me everything's okay, just sign. But then what my client said was, I gave it to my buyer in electronic form, but a week before that, I gave it to her in a different form. And I said, take a look at this, let's talk about it. And so, and then going into the form now here, and I was just talking with you about this before we went on into the seminar. So, the difference, a significant difference in the residential purchase agreement is that you now have this paragraph 3, which I call the summary, or you can think of it as a checklist of the key terms. It's really the timeline in here. So this section, this paragraph 3, I think it's really easy to use. It simplifies it. It's more efficient. You can see, like on page 2, you can see how much time for the contingencies. Here in this transaction, the people put 10 for the loan, 15 for appraisal, 10 for investigation. That's on the quicker side, but my point is just that this summary or checklist makes the agreement more manageable for the buyer and for you. And it's actually just a preview. So everything that you see in here this is the preview, and then the substance, the detail, is in pages 4 through 16 of the document. And so I'm just, and I've got in my outline here, not everything in the purchase agreement, but some key parts of it that I've selected for the seminar today. And so like at point 3 in my outline, contract terms, well, then if you go into paragraph 3 in the agreement, you got your terms and conditions there, of course, your purchase price, your escrow, length of escrow period, and then time period for seller to respond. Of course, your offer, make that based on an analysis of comparable properties. And not just a number that your client picks. Of course, you want it to be consistent with their budget, but have some kind of comparison analysis behind that number. 30 days for your escrow. Of course, that's standard. Do you want to be more aggressive? Maybe your buyer wants to be more aggressive, making that a 20-day escrow period. But be sure you have enough time there, because with your loan, your appraisal, your investigation, review of seller documents, I would encourage you to stay close to 30 days, because maybe you have your home inspector, your buyer's busy working, your home inspector can only come on this day, and then your chimney inspector, your termite inspector can only come on this day. So if if you're making this a 15-day escrow, half of 30, you're going to be pretty rushed. And that's how your buyer gets into the situation where, well, I didn't understand this, my agent just told me you got to remove contingency this day. And 3C, seller response, the default, the standard under the form is, of course, 3 calendar days. Does the seller really need 3 calendar days? Probably not. You could adjust that to 2 days if you would like. If you're in a more competitive situation, maybe your buyer's making offers on different properties at one time, and you want to know where you stand. You could adjust that to 2 days. I also see that adjusted to 2 days even more on counter offers, because you're already into the relationship. So if you do 3 days on your initial offer, why not make a counter offer 2 days? Okay, so your purchase price, of course, but your buyer has to make a deposit. They call it the EMD, the earnest money deposit, the initial deposit. That is, so it's here in paragraph 3 under this 3D. And if you want to see where it is within the body of the contract, it's referred to at paragraph 5 and 29. And I say liquidated damages in my outline. Why do we call it liquidated damages? Well, your deposit, it shows your client has some skin in it. Your client's serious. They have some financial ability to make this purchase. If they can't come up with even just the 3% within a few days, maybe they're not even going to be able to complete the transaction. So, but what happens with this deposit? So if you get into a situation where maybe the buyer's doing an investigation, sees cracks in the foundation, drives by the property a second time, and the neighbors are really noisy, and they're within that investigation contingency period, then the buyer has a right to cancel the agreement. That's under paragraph 14 of the purchase agreement. It's the buyer's right to cancel, and that would be a valid grounds for cancellation. So you put that 3% into escrow, you're within your contingency period. You find something that is not suitable to suitable to you with the property, some kind of defect, an inspection, you get that 3% back, or at least legally you have a right to get it back. Maybe if you're dealing with a more difficult seller, it becomes more complicated, but following the law under the contract, you have a right to get it back. And when would you not get it back? Well, let's say that having difficulty qualifying your loan. You're on 3, 4, 5 extensions of the loan. Turns out you just can't qualify for your loan. In that situation, your seller becomes more frustrated. With the passage of time. The longer the transaction goes on, the more that the seller is, passing up other offers in the marketplace. And so if you're on 4 months of extensions to get your loan, then the seller is going to have a better argument, a better legal position that there is grounds for him to keep the deposit. But it can also be a negotiation point. He doesn't need to keep the entire deposit. Maybe you're negotiating with the listing agent, keeps part of the deposit. What is the deposit intended to represent in terms of seller's losses, seller's damages? It's going to be lost market opportunity with other offers. The interesting issue with return of the deposit is if the buyer properly cancels the contract, you canceled the contract, but the deposit, it's held by escrow. And as you hopefully escrow is separate from the purchase agreement. So if you cancel the purchase agreement, you still need to have an escrow instruction signed by buyer and seller in order to get the deposit back. And I've seen cases where the deposit is held until there's a mediation, it's held until there's a lawsuit, and even it's held on a year or two into a lawsuit. The key with that situation is trying to resolve it early. And if you do get to the point where there's a mediation or a lawsuit filed, I'd recommend even try to just get back part of the deposit, because having your 50,000, 60,000, 70,000 sitting in escrow for a year is not just a business-like and productive way of managing your money. Yeah.
But that also holds up the seller from selling the property, right?
I mean, if you have an open escrow, you can't sell the property. So maybe by that time there's what we call a lis pendens on the property, a lien is placed on the property. So the seller also has the buyer wants his money back, of course, but the seller also wants to be able to sell the property. So the longer that the dispute continues, it's problematic for both sides.
Sir, could you address when there's a contract let, it's fully executed, turned into escrow, and then no deposit is put into escrow? Because we go through the cancellation process, but what else? Anything else?
So, the deposit has to be provided within that specified time period, 3 days, of course. If buyer doesn't put it in, the buyer is starting to become in breach, and the seller has to give the notice to perform. That, to me, if I was, talking with the listing agent, if that 3 days comes around and they can't put in, 40,000, 50,000, 60,000, that 3%, I would start backing out of that contract.
And notice to perform.
No, yes.
And then, of course, okay, you go through the full consolation with your car documents. What about the escrow side? Does both parties have to sign something that escrow's canceled?
That's a neat question. Because
people,
the escrow, it kind of comes to life more when the funds are put in.
right?
So on the one hand, you just have an escrow in paperwork,
Yes.
and the escrow, comes to life and becomes more meaningful when the deposit is placed in there. So yes, it should be simpler to unwind that situation because the deposit is not an escrow. So there's, notice the buyer to perform, then seller can issue the cancellation, of course. So your contract is canceled. Technically, you still have an open escrow, so you should require the buyer to sign a cancellation instruction.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yes.
Well, we got separate versions of this answer, because when we asked escrow,
they tell us we don't have an escrow because it's not a valid escrow unless there's a deposit.
Okay, so-
To that.
So here, okay, so let's take it another step further. I guess it really depends like on what day the person tries to cancel. So the question then is, have seller and buyer already signed escrow instructions in addition to the purchase agreement with escrow? You know, that also starts the escrow. If escrow sends out their own supplemental instructions, if seller and buyer have already signed those instructions, so you're at, okay, say you're at, maybe seller and buyer are, you know, they respond to things quickly, so on acceptance, day 2, okay, so day 3 in the morning of day 3, seller and buyer sign a mutual escrow instruction, but they haven't gone to Bank of America. Buyer hasn't gone to Bank of America yet to do the wire. So that morning at 10 o'clock, they signed the escrow instruction that has some more language that looks like escrow is open. That by signing that, I think that weighs in favor of saying escrow is open. But when the buyer is driving to the bank at 1:45 in the afternoon, buyer's wife or son called and said, God, I found another property. Stops, he doesn't go into Bank of America, he doesn't do the wire transfer. So then, you know, he doesn't do the wire transfer. Well, that makes it easier for buyer to back out, of course, and that would support the argument that escrow isn't open. But I say that if additional escrow instructions have been signed, like beyond, I mean, legally, there's escrow instructions in this document. It says purchase agreement and joint escrow instructions, but if those escrow, if buyer and seller have already signed something else from escrow, I would ask for a mutual cancellation instruction with escrow that both buyer and seller sign.
Kind of like showing intent, additional intent to purchase, kind of.
Kind of.
One thing is going through the purchase agreement, right? And you getting it accepted, and then signing the instruction would be an additional intent of the buyer to proceed with the purchase, right?
Correct. Yes. Yes.
So can they put it back on the market? Let's say escrow was open, you know, they canceled the contract, whatever, but there's not a form from escrow signed to cancel that escrow and there was no deposit. Can the seller technically stick that back on the market without the caveat, subject to cancellation of current escrow because there was an escrow number? See, that's where it gets sticky.
Right. It does get sticky
Very
there.
sticky.
Right. It does get sticky there. So
But isn't the non-deposit of the earnest deposit a breach of that contract already?
it is, yes. And so the seller has canceled the contract. So, you know, try really hard to get the buyer to sign an escrow cancellation instruction. Say, give it 10 days before you start marketing the property again.
Okay, thank you.
And really push for that mutually signed instruction. I would not put it on the market. I wouldn't go out again with another buyer the next day.
And what about in the escrow instruction, you stipulate that in order to open escrow, you have to put in your deposit.
So,
If you give that requirement, then that means if you don't put in the deposit, you won't have escrow. You won't have escrow. Yeah.
I mean, correct,
Yeah.
that's-
You already have that.
And then, so do you use, Peter, is it a Coldwell Banker owned escrow that you, it's not an affiliated one? Okay. So one,
Getting them to put that verbiage in there, right?
right, I mean, they're not your own escrow. So if you have a relation, I mean, they may talk to their attorney and say, well, we don't just draft escrow instructions the way we want them to, we draft them to protect ourselves. But the main point here is that escrow is a separate relationship from the purchase agreement. So you should take steps to get it canceled after the contract is canceled. Sure.
Okay, my question is, okay, when do we sign the escrow number? Isn't it after the fact that you have that money on the books? Or do they just automatically assign money?
I mean, that could vary by escrow
So
officer.
if they haven't signed them a number,
Mhm.
seem like it would be easy to close, you know, if the person didn't put, if the buyer didn't put in the deposit. I mean, the money, you see what I'm saying? If they haven't taken any money, nothing have really actually been open.
Yeah.
Okay,
And look like escrow wouldn't start assigning numbers and stuff until they have everything they need on hand at that moment.
But like Brian said, it depends on the escrow company, you know,
Yeah.
what, like, right?
Ours
Yeah.
assigns right away, the one we
Assigns right away.
use, yeah, when we send the purchase contract in. So it does depend.
now, so talking about the loan process somewhat, and that would be paragraph 5 under the purchase agreement. And under there, of course, have your buyer start the qualification process before the offer is made. And I also tell real estate agents, you know, stay within your lane. Let the advice about whether a buyer will qualify or on what terms, let that advice be given by the mortgage broker, not by the real estate agent, him or herself. Because you kind of, you know, then you get into a situation where you're a day before the loan contingency is set to expire and your buyer finds out that really he or she didn't qualify. Ultimately, they were declined for the loan, and that at that point, then maybe the seller says the buyer's in breach, and then when the seller sues the buyer then puts the responsibility on you. Told me my real estate agent told me I would qualify. My real estate agent told me I would qualify for $1 million loan. So let someone else offer the opinion about whether the buyer will qualify for the loan. And I started to say a few minutes ago, don't exaggerate your buyer's financial abilities to the listing agent. Then if your buyer breaches, if your buyer can't come up with the funds, the property's been in this dragged out escrow for 3 months. Sellers lost other buyers. And I have a case in Pasadena where then the listing agent sued the buyer and also sued the buyer's agent, saying you perpetrated a fraud upon me. You misrepresented the buyer's financial condition. Remember, if you have an all cash offer, you need to provide, documentation, proof of funds of the buyer's ability to perform, to fund the transaction. So in the case I had with this, I'm going to call them a flipper in Pasadena, the buyer's agent there the buyer did your online banking on your iPhone. Buyer did a screenshot, then texted the screenshot to his agent, and buyer's agent then sent that screenshot to the listing agent. It showed, Chase Bank, $800,000 in this account, but it didn't have the buyer's name on it. Didn't have, really, I mean, it could have been from anyone's screenshot. So, I mean, you're dealing with a house, you're dealing with, $1 million house, maybe more. Ask your buyer to go online and find a bank statement that has his name and address. That was one of the points that the seller in that case raised as a misrepresentation by the buyer's agent, saying that, well, you just gave me this text message screenshot that had some account. It said, Chase Bank account 324 with $810,000 in there. That was a misrepresentation by you as to your buyer's financial abilities. Now, in the end, we actually won that case. We got a complete dismissal for the real estate agent. And the way that we did that was by saying that, and this is a principle that, applies broadly as a real estate agent, you're allowed to rely on reasonable representations of your buyer, you're not required to investigate their finances. So your buyer is like, a reasonable guy or lady, they kind of, dress nice, they tell you this is what I do for a living. They give you that bank statement with their name and address on it that says, I've got X $100,000 here, I got $400,000 here, I got another $50,000 here. Those are reasonable statements by your buyer. You're allowed to reasonably rely on them. You're not required to call Chase Bank and say, this or this, or you have to give me more information. I have to call your employer. You're not required to investigate. You can reasonably rely on that. That's how we actually got the agent dismissed from that case. But the brief point for you is that case may have settled earlier and simpler if the buyer's agent had used the bank statement with the name and address on it rather than screenshot from my iPhone. Yeah, was there a question?
Isn't there some of the burden on the other side too? Because they actually accepted that document, right? Obviously, and moved forward,
There is, sure.
right?
So yes, the seller's side has a responsibility to ask questions. So, they, in that case, they said that, well, I asked questions, they were slow in getting back to me. He said, I went to the bank this day, I went and they gave me this information. It was the wire transfer actually wasn't made. So there was this issue with the bank, this issue with the bank. But certainly, yeah, if you're on the other side and you get that screenshot, you get to, you reply back and say, I need something with the buyer's name and address on it.
Right.
And then,
Is the screenshot the copy of the statement?
good question. So in this case, it was just, it didn't have a name on it. So, yeah.
But at the end, you said the buyer.
We did, yeah, the buyer's agent got out of it, the case, yeah.
Sure, right? Last four numbers, it shows up on when you take the screenshot,
Right.
doesn't it take the last four account number and then the total balance? So you know that if that matches to the original statement of balance, wouldn't that be like?
It just has a better appearance, to do something. I mean, you're dealing with $1 million and someone buying a house,
But those account numbers.
Right.
show like-
yeah. I mean, it could vary, but maybe some of the screenshots look better than others, but in this case, it wasn't. So, let's see. Okay, so. Okay, contingencies, let's go to. There's a paragraph on the contingencies here. Yeah, paragraph 8. And. Obviously, the contingency is something that has to happen in order for the contract to proceed. So if the buyer does investigation, the buyer doesn't qualify for a loan, the buyer doesn't have to proceed. I mean, the contingencies are usually on the buyer's side. I mean, on the seller's side, sometimes in rare cases, there's a contingency like I'm only, selling if I find a replacement property, but usually they're on the buyer's side. You've got in my outline, loan, appraisal, investigation, review of seller documents. What's the best time period for your buyer? For the contingencies, be generous and protective to your buyer. Don't do, I think even in this contract, it says 10 days, but this was a real sophisticated buyer that, definitely had the financial ability. So give your client, I mean, it says 17 days, try that, do 15 days, okay, but really use great care if you're going down to 10 days or less. Okay, and contingency removals. So you have a time period to do these things. You have a time period to qualify for your loan. You have a time period to do your investigation of the property. That is in paragraph 8 of the purchase agreement also. And there it is. 8 contingencies and removal of contingencies. A is loan. B is appraisal. C is investigation of the property. And keep on loan and appraisal contingencies, they're related, but under the contract, they're separate. Investigation of the property. I like to point out that it says investigation. It doesn't say inspection of the property because investigation is broader than an inspection. So an inspection is you walk through with your general home inspector or your termite inspector you find something in the physical condition of the property that you don't like, but investigation is broader. It could mean that you review records at the city. And really, it should be the buyer that reviews them, not you, the agent, but you review some building permits, or you talk with neighbors, or you find out that there's some other lien on the property, there's back taxes there, dude, that's investigation. So investigation of the property, it's this huge umbrella. Anything about the property that you like or don't like, that's investigation of the property. It's not merely, I went through with the home inspector and I saw a crack on the wall. Those investigation periods, giving yourself as much time as possible. And at the end of the contingency period, you need to remove the contingency or cancel the contract. I have a case, we're dealing with a loan contingency. It's been in the courts for about 2 years. The seller's agent, in that case, the dispute is, did the buyer ever remove contingencies? And buyer never. I brought some of the forms. I don't have a copy for everyone. Some of the other forms. If you want to talk with me when I finish up, please come up. I can, go through these other forms with you. But, of course, there's a form, there's a CAR form for contingency removal. The seller's attorney in that case came up with this argument of this passive removal of the contingency through conduct. No, you have to, just on your list of a few things you take away from today, conversations, emails, text messages, do not remove contingencies. You must use the CAR form. Cancellation. Okay, talking about contingencies, the next logical step would be, is it time for cancellation? We began to talk about this earlier. Let's say that you get to the 15 days for loan contingency. At that point, your listing agent, you're getting a call from the buyer's agent. Oh gosh, I need some more time. We don't have a loan yet. Okay, you give another 10 days for loan contingencies. That's in writing. Also, there's a form for extending that contingency. But you get to that 10 days, they say, oh, I need another one. And your seller's getting, frustrated here. I mean, the buyer has not met the contingency period. So at that point, if the seller says, I just can't go on with this any longer, I've got to get this property sold to, help out with family debt. I just can't wait any longer. Sorry. How do you cancel? Well, 14C of the residential purchase agreement. Okay, that is the paragraph which deals with cancellation. Well, C is seller's right to cancel. And D is buyer's right to cancel. So I gave the example of the loan contingency, buyer doesn't remove it, it could be an investigation contingency. So at that, the contingency expires, the next day you give that form, notice to buyer to perform. If you want to, talk about it more, here, I have a copy, notice to buyer to perform, it's that form. It gives 2 days to perform. And if you cancel without giving this form and allowing the 2 full days to pass, then you, seller, have reached the agreement. So you only wait 1 day, or you think that maybe an email, you send out this email in bold and caps, contract is canceled, and then somehow, I hope not, but you're under the impression that that cancels the agreement. And then the next day, there's another offer even higher. Your seller accepts that offer. You've really started up an issue, because you have not properly canceled the first contract. You're still in contract, but your seller is committing to another contract. So that buyer could still compel you to sell the property to him, and you're starting to commit to another buyer. That is how these problems arise. But the lesson is, use the form and wait the 2 days, and be sure you deliver it in an email to the listing agent be sure you note the date and time that it's delivered. And then also under this paragraph 8 in my outline, buyer's cancellation. Well, why would a buyer want to cancel? A seller doesn't deliver the disclosures. Seller doesn't allow access for inspections. Now, 14D, this is a really important paragraph, 14D, because this gives a buyer right to cancel. And I really like 14D3. Buyer right to cancel. Buyer may cancel this agreement by good faith exercise of any buyer contingency included in paragraph 8. Or otherwise agrees so long as that contingency has not been removed. So anything with investigation, inspection, loan, you send the form and you refer to paragraph, you say good faith exercise of 14D3. It's very broad. I mean, even if your buyer just changes her mind or changes his mind, it falls under 14D3. This 14D3 is protection for the buyer's side. It is a broad right, it is a right to cancel, it is a flexible right to cancel, it is buyer friendly. And so 8 under my outline there, we talked about this before earlier today, that contract, the purchase agreement and the escrow are separate. I put in my outline technically at least, because certainly they're related, but are they separate? If I answer your question legally as an attorney, they are separate obligations. And the reason that you need in the big picture, the reason that you need seller and buyer signature on the escrow instruction for the release of the deposit is that the escrow is a neutral party. It only acts pursuant to mutually signed instructions of the parties to the contract. You as the real estate agent, you represent seller or buyer. Maybe you're a dual agent in some circumstances, but you're the listing agent, you're an advocate for your client, but escrow is neutral. So we can't call escrow and say, you've got to shorten the escrow. My buyer wants it 20 days, or my buyer wants this whole deposit back. Escrow is going to say to you, I have to get the consent in a mutual instruction from the other side. I just settled a case with a house in the San Fernando Valley in Tarzana. And it's really interesting because, now everything, homes are now more technologically advanced. So, I mean, I was growing up, you open the house with a key, you turn on the air conditioning when you go to the wall and you push the button. You have a remote control for the TV, but now, it's a smart home. I think they call it Google Home, where you can just, so there's one device on the wall where you control the locks, you control the AC, you control the music, or you can speak to Google like it's, Google turn on the lights. So in this case, it was a $4 million house. The buyer makes his offer, very sophisticated, wealthy man. Seller accepts it. He wasn't as sharp as a fellow. Escrow closes. The interesting thing is there is no verification of property condition inspection a few days before closing. And I've got that in point 10 of my outline. So take note of that, please. So buyer comes into the property after close of escrow and he comes in, he's like, oh my gosh, there's wires. The control panel's pulled out of the wall. There's wires hanging out. I can't turn on the lights. I can't turn on the AC. I can't even lock the door. I just paid $4 million plus for my house. And the control panel is removed from the wall. It also came up with, there was a beautiful home movie theater in there. So the like that, as you see here, and that had been removed, so
Wow.
the purchase agreement. It's not as big as an issue of what's the investigation rights, how do you cancel, but I just had this come up in a case. And I think it's really interesting, and. It's paragraph 9, so what are the items included in the sale? So the seller somehow had this wild idea
Yeah.
that he was just selling, the walls and the floor of the house, but he wasn't selling the movie projector or the smart home panel on the wall. So the buyer sued him for breach of contract. It became like a $40,000 issue with all the things he pulled out. And so the lesson is paragraph 9, items included in sale, and look at our summary part of the contract at the start, and that nice checklist you call the flow chart. But here we are on page 3 of 16 of the new purchase agreement. That is at 3, I'll be precise, it is at 3T1
Yeah.
of this chart, items included in sale. Stove, refrigerators, okay, then they have the boxes for security cam equipment, security systems, smart home control devices. So if your buyer wants to see those in the house when he's moving in a month later, be sure that these boxes are checked.
Yeah.
Now, paragraph 9, as an attorney, if I read paragraph 9, I'm gonna tell you, yes, those are included in the sale by the fine prints of this paragraph, but practically speaking, if they are important to your buyer, be sure these boxes are checked.
Yeah. Mhm.
And just to tail on to that,
So
yes,
who was gonna win then if the buyer did not check it? But it stated that the clinician.
interesting question. Okay, so and the following if checked. So if it's not checked in this one, paragraph 9 here, then there is a strong argument that they are not included in the sale. So if they're not checked here, they're not included in the sale.
So the grid is what's gonna over.
Yes, yes, the grid is gonna control, yes. And so, I mean, could this have been avoided? Well, first by properly preparing the contract, but also through doing that verification of property condition 5 days before. Sometimes people don't do it. They think, oh, I looked at the property before I made my offer. I looked at it again, then I looked there for the home inspection. Seller's really nice, but it should take you an hour, and it will save you the issue of the movie theater equipment wasn't there when I moved in. It's also a good time to talk about things like, when will you turn over the keys? Is it going to be really the day escrow closes, or is it going to be 2 days later? And that brings me to the last point on my outline. So I've got paragraph 7C, closing and possession. And just the points to take home from there is that seller may not be ready to move out on the day of close of escrow. Just as a courtesy, allow additional time. It could be 10 days, it could be 20 days, it could be 30 days. I see 30 days frequently. And it's a lease back, and there's a specific, but for a seller lease back, there's a specific lease that's used. Residential lease after sale. So it's not the lease that you would use if this was just an investment property and someone's leasing it for a year. You're negotiating the rent, you're the lease listing agent, there's not a sale involved. If seller just needs that extra 30 days or so after escrow, it's the residential lease after sale. And it's a different lease from the lease you would use if this was just a rental property. I've got a copy up here. If you want to take a look at it, you're welcome to. So one other thing, I think probably my last point for today, and then I'll take questions on the purchase agreement. Okay, so paragraph 32, it's almost at the last page, page 15. Entity buyers, so the simpler transaction, you're just buying the property for yourself. You and your husband, wife, you're buying the house, you're buying the house for yourself, but what if you're buying it as an LLC? What if you're selling it as the trustee of a trust? Your mom or dad passed away, you're the successor trustee of the trust. You're what's called an entity seller or an entity buyer. There, you need to be the authorized representative of the entity to sign the listing agreement. Not you, the real estate agent, but the seller. The seller needs their authorized representative to sign the listing agreement, and the buyer needs their authorized representative to make the offer. So by signing here as the buyer, you're representing that you have the authority to enter into this contract. I had a case, this was a old craftsman style house in Hollywood. Dad passed away, then mom passed away. Brother and sister, they were gonna sell the house. They really weren't getting along too well. And sister contacts is one of the other major brokers in Los Angeles. Sister contacts listing agent, does a listing agreement, market the property. One interesting thing is she says that I don't want a for sale sign up on the house. She doesn't want a for sale sign up on the house, doesn't want neighbors to know. And, I think she didn't want the for sale sign up because she didn't want her brother to be driving by and seeing that she was selling the house.
Right.
So, yeah, so what if you're, say you're the listing agent, you're showing the house, else, car pulls up, it's brother. Maybe it's not that dramatic. Maybe it's not during a showing. That's an extreme example, but maybe you're the listing agent and you get that text that says, hi, I'm Joe. I heard you're selling Dad's house.
Yes.
Why do you think you get to do that? And you should, well, who are you? And then this person tells you, well, I'm Mary's brother. I'm a co-owner of this house. I'm a successor co-trustee of the trust that owns the house. I didn't sign this listing agreement. You can't sell this house. Well, that is the start of a problem. That could very well be the start of a lawsuit there. So, maybe your seller didn't understand or didn't really properly represent to you his or her authority. So in that situation, you need to hit pause on the transaction, and so ask the person who signed the listing agreement, can I have a copy of the trust documents for this trust which owns the property? Maybe it's a certification of trust. The title of the document, you don't have to use the precise term, but say, please email me the trust documents for this property so that I can review them with my manager. Yeah. Because that's what we're talking about, whether an entity has authority to sell the house. So in that case, and I've had this happen more than once, sister sells the house, and then brother, the other family member, then files a lawsuit to, try to stop it before escrow closes, or they even, then they sue for, saying you deprived me of my interest under the state. They're suing for, $500,000 after the sale. So you're allowed, when your seller tells you, yeah, I'm the trustee, I have the authority to sell the property. Okay, you're allowed to rely on reasonable representations. But once that red flag comes up, once you get that voicemail or that text message from, I'm Mary's brother, what are you doing here?
Yeah.
Stop, ask for supporting documents, and talk with your manager. So that's all I have for you all today. I hope that gave you some key points to take away from this. I can answer questions and stick around for some more. Yes.
Before you have the red flag, you should ascertain who's the successor president or who has authority to sign
Mhm.
that purchase agreement,
Right,
right?
sure. You should, yes, it's always a good idea to ask questions of your seller, or of your buyer. Yeah.
So when you have a property, that's in a trust, should we not assume that that person that wants to sell it has the full authority? Like the example, should you ask for those documents?
It's good to ask for it, yes. The best practice is to ask for those documents, yes.
The thing when you go have a probate, they get letters.
Right.
So it's-
Yeah.
It's hard to fool a person.
Yeah.
going to court.
Probate is even trickier than with a trust, so, yes.
I have a question. When people ask for extensions on contingencies, sometimes they'll say, sure, but you're gonna release some of the deposit. This is more applicable
Right.
to commercial transactions.
Okay,
But what is your thought on them doing that on a residential transaction?
so my thought is that if it's released, it's going to be non-refundable. So if
Correct.
if buyer says, okay, you give me some more time, I'll release part of my deposit to you, buyer cannot expect to get that back.
Okay, so.
And it should only happen once. I see cases where I asked for an extension, okay, I asked for another extension, then they said release 20,000 of my deposit, then I asked for another extension, they released another 20,000. Every time you're asking for an extension or some concession, there's more potential for legal problems in the transaction. So if you need to do it once, okay, but it shouldn't be a repeated thing in a transaction.
Okay, so you're okay with it worded that it's non-refundable because they're giving them extensions to release partial deposit?
Yeah, with the proper legal language in the documents,
Correct.
yes.
Okay, all right, thank
Yeah.
you.
What was your question?
Sometimes they take a partial of a deposit when there's an extension of time and have it non-refundable released to the seller. So I was just asking in this opinion.
Oh, the partial.
Release it completely. If the seller requests for a complete release of all the deposit.
So your loan contingency is up, buyer says, I need another 20 days to get my loan. Seller says,
No, without extension. The
with,
seller just basically said like, once you remove contingency, I want you to release the deposit to the seller. Even before the escrow is closed.
so, it's,
Can
my
they
question would be
ask for-
why? It's not a good practice,
It's not, right?
right?
You should
Yeah,
have.
that's an
should
aggressive
have
seller.
Yeah,
I have a question going back to contingencies and, of buyer's way to cancel. And this actually has come up where for one reason or another, the buyer either goes into contract without an appraisal contingency, because, obviously in the past couple of years, we saw bidding wars and that's how things were getting done. Or they remove the appraisal contingency and they use that appraisal contingency. I'm sorry, they used the appraisal not coming in that value, the appraisal did not come in value. But now they cannot use the loan contingency to back out. Unless if there's another reason other than just the appraisal. What's your view on that?
so you're saying the property did not appraise?
But that's the reason why the loan cannot be satisfied, because now there's a gap. The buyer didn't anticipate that gap, was relying on the house appraising. So I'm sorry, I can't get you this loan because they didn't appraise unless you come up with money. So, but technically, unless there's another reason for the loan not being satisfied, because you waived the appraisal, so there's kind of like a little gray area
So-
there.
I like it when when you check the box, all contingencies removed. I like to keep contingencies removed together. You can remove one contingency, but not another. But that seems to be a possible, it's not ideal. So the best situation is where, you know, you've done your investigations, you get your loan, you check the box for remove all contingencies. You can, you could say, yeah, I've done my inspections. I've checked some records at the county. I'm removing my investigation contingency, but not my loan and appraisal contingency. I mean, the loan and appraisal contingency, I think they should be removed together. I mean, they're so closely related. I'm just, you know, wondering, like, I mean, how would that work if you have one but not the other?
This actually did happen.
I mean, they're so closely related. So I would say don't remove one without removing, try to remove all your contingencies at one time. Don't remove loan without removing keep appraisal and loan contingency together, and remove them at the same time.
But in your view, if it wasn't done, let's just hypothetically.
Okay,
I mean, things happen, right? And I.
Right.
saw this.
yeah, no,
Right.
things, sure.
Right, so what's your view on that? Because technically the loan cannot be satisfied because the appraisal didn't come in at value, but the actual value, you know, the appraisal was removed. The contingency was removed. Can't
Well,
that be a reason for them to back out?
I mean, can we talk with the lender and try to get different terms on the loan?
Oh, yeah, coming over with no money.
Yeah,
Yeah, but was the buyer expecting that? That's the whole reason, that's the whole reason,
Yeah,
that the
so
buyer
you're-
says, yeah, you know, but this isn't expecting
For
the
some
appraisal to
reason.
come in short. And now the only way to satisfy the loan is to come in with that gap,
Yeah.
which he wasn't anticipating coming in with that gap. and had it.
I mean, you know, so as the agent, did the buyer's agent, you know, make, you know, too high of an offer? Did the buyer's agent make any, did the buyer's agent, I'd want to be careful. Did
Yeah.
buyer's agent make any comments about how the property's value, or, oh yeah, this will appraise at 1.2 million? You know, we wouldn't want to learn that the buyer's agent said that.
Right.
Yeah.
But the buyer's agent should do a good comparative market analysis and come conservatively a little bit below that, put an offer.
Right.
You know, if they're not able to come up with the extra money, right? Don't you think? I
The,
mean, how do you
Yeah,
work this otherwise?
Well, that's good practice,
Right.
and
Yeah.
I'm just trying to get to this one specific situation.
Yeah.
and then
It's kind of like, well, you can't get the loan because the appraisal came in at, less than value, but you remove the appraisal contingency, well, that can't be a means of cancellation. So it's kind of like, wow, I didn't think about that, and based on the counsel that we got, was that you cannot use the appraisal contingency as a way to get out for the loan, because that's the only reason that the loan was denied.
well, so that paragraph 14 that I was referring to, it says by the good faith exercise of any buyer contingency in paragraph 8. So if your appraisal, if it hasn't appraised out and your loan's not approved, then, you know, I think the buyer has wiggle room to say that I'm in good faith exercise of my contingencies included in paragraph 8. That's why I say I love that paragraph. It's broad, it's flexible, it's an umbrella paragraph for the buyers. With authority to sell or to buy, and our discussion, one more point, we were talking about trust and asking for the trust documents. That also comes up with an LLC. So if you're selling a property owned by the 567 Garfield LLC, when you're providing that draft listing agreement, it's a good idea to say, would you also provide me with the operating agreement for the LLC? For an LLC, the governing document will be called the operating agreement. For, you know, a corporation, articles of incorporation. So when you are, before that listing agreement is signed, when you're talking about that listing price, that listing period, it is a good idea to say, hey, could you get me a copy of the operating agreement for the LLC? You know, my broker wants me to have that in these situations. My manager likes to see those when I'm representing a business. Okay, so other questions?
How about in the case where the seller alternates to maybe subject for the seller to find a replacement of those conditions?
So,
You run into cases where.
So seller has a seller wants to sell only if he or she finds another property.
Yes.
It does happen. And that could be a contingency for seller finding replacement property. And you could put that in, I think, in other terms. There's an other terms paragraph here. Let's find that number. Oh, yeah, it's on page 3, other terms. So you could put in there, sellers. Sale is seller has contingency for finding a replacement property. So the interesting thing with that you need to be careful of is, what does that mean? Does it mean I just found it, like I drove by and I liked it, or does it mean I'm in escrow, or does it mean I've closed escrow? So in that situation, listing agent, you want, well,
Specific, yeah.
you want to be specific. You want to say it's contingent on seller's close of escrow on a replacement property. And actually, I want to correct myself a little bit here. So that term would probably be in a counter offer from the seller, because obviously offers from the buyer. So you want to be specific and say, it's not just I found the property, like I drive by it. It's not just I made an offer, say contingent on seller closing escrow on a replacement property.
Or some limits of.
Right, yes. No, that's another good idea. Yes, yes, yes. Yes.
Right, like Ruben said, right now investors are using all kinds of gimmicks. I've always had a problem with, or assignee.
Okay,
How would, I usually say, clean it up, name the buyer and eliminate the assignee.
yeah, people do use that. They use an investment vehicle to take title of the property. I mean, it's allowed, it's done.
Right,
And the other thing that can happen is, you could see it on the offer, but you could also see it during the escrow that there is an amendment that says title shall be vested in XYZ LLC. So it's not like a deal breaker,
okay.
Yeah,
Sometimes they're renaming, like they want to make an LLC specific to that property.
exactly, sure.
So sometimes that could be the case.
But when they do that, Brian, does that same deposit stay with does that transfer automatically?
Yes, it doesn't change.
Okay.
It
good.
doesn't change those terms, yes.
Okay, good.
Yeah, just to add to that, Carlos, a lot of wholesalers are doing that.
Yeah.
Because what they do is they tie it
You wanna find
and then they
money.
market it to another person that wants to buy it, and then they'll sell it for more or whatever.
So what should I do?
Don't accept that sign.
Thank you.
Yeah, unless you're working with a wholesaler and they identify themselves as a
Exactly.
wholesaler, then you know what they're trying to do.
Thank
But
you.
if you want a clean sale,
Right.
don't
So
allow
really,
really,
okay.
you find it and stick with that person.
Yeah.
Look at the grid, because there's an assignment,
Uh-huh.
17 days contingency, so you could take that way down. I need number K on page 2. Assignment request 17 days after acceptance, so make sure you're taking that down if you're not happy with an assignment request.
Yeah, I know.
See, number K, last K, on page 2.
Page 2.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good point, that if it's going to be done, it should be done, within that time period.
Like Ruben said, tie it up.
Right.
Find a
That's what-
buyer.
That's what a lot of, so if you see and or a signing on your purchase agreement and you're a listing agent, just,
Clean it up.
you need to contact the buyer, and make sure that what their intentions are, because ask them straight out, are you a wholesaler, or is your intentions to find another? And if you're okay working with that type of person, your seller is okay, move forward. If not, then,
Yeah.
You also.
For the,
That.
for
is,
the cash.
sometimes
What's that?
the
For
buyer
the
is-
cash communication or cash.
Look,
You need to
sometimes
have
the buyer
you need to have
is-
the bank group.
when the buyer is a group,
Or cash
Um,
bank or
you're not able.
you need to have
all the-
in that.
The money is expired and the-
Yes, there needs to be a proof of it, yes. Yeah, that's in that's in the contract, yes, it's in paragraph, I think it's 5. Yeah, I'll look at 5B,
It's
5B?
yes,
after the purchase
Yeah.
is-
Yeah, it's either attached to the. Right here.
yeah.
Because that's the
Look at H,
contract.
it's either attached to
Because that's the
the,
alternative
he took
that
you
you
to the
do.
paragraph.
H.
But by speaking to them, all 5B, but I identify.
Yeah, 5B
Yeah.
and it's on H. Red.
So anyways, anything else?
Do you want to look
I-
at it?
I wasn't looking at my watch, so I probably have gone way over. I'm sorry if I went too long. Yeah. I hope so, yeah. Thank you so much. How are you doing?
Yeah. Beautiful. It was
Thank you.
really
Thanks so much.
informative.
I hope so.
Yeah, very, was great. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.